The year was 2025, and Thomas was on the verge of uncovering something so shocking it would make all of mankind question the true nature of space exploration. Thomas was a mid-level government employee at the National Archives, with no idea that his life was about to take a dark turn. It was a dreary Wednesday when he stumbled upon a file labeled Apollo 21, Mercury mission, a file that wasn't supposed to exist. He knew something was off when he first saw it. It was buried deep within stacks of classified papers, tucked in the very back of the room, a place no one ever dared to venture. The document was heavily redacted, with large black bars across its most important details, but even through the redactions, Thomas noticed the words Mercury, Apollo, and the chilling phrase, "They never came back." His hands shook as he sifted through the pages, each more cryptic than the last. There were mentions of a mission launched after Apollo 17, which, according to history, had been the final moon mission. But this, Apollo 21, was a mission that no one had ever heard of. It was sent to Mercury, and then nothing. The astronauts who were aboard Apollo 21 were never heard from again. As Thomas delved deeper into the file, he found references to strange radio silence from the mission's spacecraft and troubling anomalies that were never publicly addressed. His curiosity only deepened, and he decided he had to find out more. The more Thomas uncovered, the darker the truth became. The file was much more than a simple collection of documents. It was a series of coded messages hidden within mundane information. As he meticulously translated the messages hidden within the technical jargon, he found a chilling revelation. Apollo 21's crew had encountered something on their journey, something that had somehow erased all traces of their presence. In one of the memos, a scientist had written about strange transmissions intercepted by the crew, distorted signals unlike anything heard before, sequences that seemed to come from deep within the solar system, far beyond Mercury. As Thomas read these findings, he could feel an unsettling tension building in his chest. The more he read, the more a sense of dread began to gnaw at him. But what troubled him the most was a single line that seemed to be buried at the bottom of one report. Mercury is not just a planet, it's a gateway. Thomas froze. What did that mean? A gateway to where? He knew that the conventional understanding of space and time would never be the same again. But his curiosity still pushed him to continue. Late one night, as Thomas sat in the dim glow of the computer screen, a strange email appeared in his inbox. It was from an anonymous source. No name, no details, just a string of numbers and a link. The email was ominous and cryptic. "You're close, but you're not meant to know. Delete this email. You've already gone too far." With his heart racing, Thomas couldn't resist. He clicked on the link. What he saw next was beyond anything he could have imagined. The link led to a private archive, a hidden database, where the files on Apollo 21 were not just records, they were visual logs, video footage, audio recordings, and private communications from the crew. As Thomas watched the first video, he was horrified. The footage was shaky, but it showed the Apollo 21 astronauts in a strange, alien environment. The walls of the spacecraft shimmered as though the very air itself was vibrating, distorting reality. The astronauts were trying to communicate, but their voices were distorted, crackling with static, and then the transmission cut out. The video ended abruptly, and Thomas was left with an overwhelming sense of dread. What had they encountered on Mercury? What had caused the strange interference? And why had the crew never returned? A few days later, Thomas received another encrypted email. This one was different. It contained coordinates and a message. "Come and find the truth. They're still there, but you're not alone." The coordinates pointed to a remote location in Nevada, not far from the infamous Area 51. Thomas couldn't believe it. He had always suspected that the government had hidden information about extraterrestrial encounters and secret missions. But this was different. This wasn't just a cover-up. This was something far more sinister. The next morning, Thomas packed a bag and headed toward the coordinates. His gut told him that the secrets he was about to uncover would change everything. But there was something else, something much darker, waiting for him. And deep down, he knew that once he opened that door, he would never be able to go back to his normal life. As Thomas ventured deeper into the Nevada desert, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The closer he got to the coordinates, the more unsettling it became. Something about the air felt wrong, as if the very landscape was holding its breath. He finally arrived at a small, nondescript building hidden away from prying eyes. The door creaked open with a sudden force, and Thomas stepped inside. His heart pounded as he descended into the underground facility, Area 51. What he found inside shattered everything he thought he knew about the world. The facility was filled with strange technology, equipment that looked like it came from another world. At the center of the room was a large, circular device glowing with a strange, ethereal light. It was unlike anything Thomas had ever seen before. A portal, humming with energy. The truth had been waiting for him all along, hidden beneath layers of secrecy and lies. But as Thomas approached the device, something whispered in the back of his mind. The Apollo 21 crew had never returned, but now they were calling him. They had opened a door that was never meant to be opened. And the question now was, would Thomas walk through it? Or would he become another part of the mystery, lost to the secrets of the universe forever? Thomas stood frozen, staring at the portal-like device that seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. His mind raced, bombarded by questions he couldn't answer. Was this the thing the Apollo 21 crew had encountered? Was this what had caused their disappearance? Or was this something far worse? He stepped closer to the device, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached out hesitantly, fingers trembling as they hovered just above its surface. There was a strange pull to it, like a magnetic force drawing him in. He could hear low, almost imperceptible whispers emanating from the device, but they weren't in any language he recognized. They felt ancient, otherworldly, Then, without warning, the device flared to life, and the room was bathed in blinding light. Thomas stumbled backward, shielding his eyes, but the light quickly dimmed, revealing what he could only describe as a vision, an image, or perhaps a memory, playing out in the center of the room. It was the crew of Apollo 21. He watched in silent horror as the astronauts struggled to maintain control of their spacecraft, their faces pale with fear. The communication logs he had seen earlier on his computer flickered to life in his mind, matching the voices he heard coming from the astronauts' suits. But this time, there was a chilling detail. As they spoke, their voices seemed distorted, altered, as if they were communicating from another dimension. "We found something. It's not just Mercury, it's more," one astronaut said, his voice trembling with a sense of unease. "It's opening. We shouldn't have—" The signal cut off abruptly. The scene faded, and the device flickered again, this time showing something entirely different. A vast, alien landscape. And then, Thomas heard it. A low, guttural growl echoed from the darkness of the vision. The ground trembled beneath the astronauts' feet. The air shifted, charged with an oppressive force that seemed to weigh down on them, suffocating their very presence. Something was waiting for them. They weren't just on Mercury anymore. They had crossed into a place far beyond human understanding. The vision ended abruptly, leaving Thomas gasping for breath, his mind reeling from what he had just witnessed. He stepped back from the device, his legs unsteady, his body trembling from the intense energy that seemed to radiate from it. But as he turned to leave, a voice, familiar yet distant, called out to him. It was the voice of one of the Apollo 21 astronauts. It spoke softly, but with a sense of urgency. "Thomas, you have to stop it. You don't know what's coming. It's already here." Thomas spun around, searching for the source of the voice, but the room was empty. The voice echoed in his mind, repeating the same chilling words. He looked back at the device, and his heart skipped a beat as he realized something. The device wasn't just a portal. It was a doorway to another realm, a dark, twisted dimension that was now bleeding into their reality. He had been led here for a reason. Apollo 21 had uncovered something they were never meant to. But now, Thomas had to stop it. He had to find a way to close the portal before whatever had escaped from it came through. But as he turned to approach the control panel, something caught his eye. A series of flashing lights on the wall. A warning. And at that moment, Thomas realized that the dangers were far greater than he could have ever imagined. The force behind the device wasn't just trying to communicate. It was trying to escape. And it wasn't alone. Thomas rushed to the console, his fingers flying over the controls. The flashing lights intensified, and a loud, high-pitched whine filled the air. He could feel the heat building in the room, the air growing thick with an energy he couldn't explain. Whatever had been unleashed was building in power, and it was hungry. Come on, Thomas muttered under his breath, his heart racing. Sweat dripped down his brow as he desperately tried to stabilize the systems. The blinking lights continued to increase in frequency, and then everything went dark. The power flickered, the room descending into an eerie silence. For a moment, Thomas thought the worst had happened, until the lights came back on, and he saw something he could never have prepared himself for. Standing in the middle of the room was a figure, or at least something that resembled a figure. It was tall, shadowy, and indistinct, its features hidden beneath an oppressive aura that seemed to bend reality itself. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything he could understand. Its presence was suffocating, and it wasn't alone. More shapes began to materialize around it, swirling in and out of view like phantoms, each one darker, more sinister than the last. They weren't physical, not in the way that Thomas understood reality. They were entities of pure energy, intelligence without form. And then the voice spoke again, the one he had heard earlier, now much clearer. You opened the door. Now you must face the consequences. The room grew colder, the air thick with dread. Thomas felt his knees buckle beneath him, but he fought to stay standing. He knew then that the only way to stop this was to understand what they had uncovered, before it was too late. But it was already too far. With the entities now fully materialized in the room, Thomas realized there was no escape. The system was no longer in his control. His only hope was to try and contain the force he had inadvertently released. He stumbled towards the portal controls, heart pounding in his chest. As he pressed the final button, a blinding light filled the room. He was thrown backward, the world spinning around him. In the instant before everything went dark, he saw the faces of the Apollo 21 crew, pale, their eyes filled with terror, frozen in time. And then, nothing. When Thomas regained consciousness, he was lying on the cold metallic floor, his head throbbing with pain. His vision was blurred, and the room seemed to spin around him. As he sat up, he realized something had changed. The room was still the same, but the atmosphere had shifted. There was a strange hum in the air, almost like an unseen force was at work. The entities were gone, but the feeling of their presence lingered, heavy and oppressive. As he staggered to his feet, he glanced at the control panel. It was dark, unresponsive. Everything he had just tried to do had failed. The systems were offline. But that was the least of his concerns. The truth was dawning on him slowly, like a nightmare, pulling him deeper into its grip. He realized what had happened. The Apollo 21 crew hadn't just disappeared. They had been consumed by something far darker. They had opened the portal to another dimension, and in doing so, they had allowed an ancient, otherworldly force to enter their world. But now, the question remained, had Thomas stopped it? Or had he merely delayed the inevitable? He stumbled toward the portal, his mind racing with questions. The device was inactive for now, but that didn't mean the entities wouldn't return. The force behind the portal had only been temporarily halted, but the danger wasn't over. The entities had crossed over once, and they would do so again if given the chance. As his fingers brushed the console, a series of images flashed before his eyes. Visions of other worlds, other dimensions, all connected by the dark web of the force he had unleashed. The images were like fractured pieces of a puzzle, slipping in and out of focus, as if trying to make him understand something he wasn't yet ready to comprehend. Suddenly, The room's temperature dropped, and a deep, guttural sound filled the air. Thomas froze, his breath visible in the chilling air. He turned slowly, his heart racing. The entities had returned. The room seemed to warp as the entities reappeared, their forms flickering in and out of visibility. Their movements were swift, almost too fast for the human eye to follow, their presence a blur of shadows and light. Their forms seemed to grow, expanding beyond the physical limits of the room, their energy almost tangible. The air itself seemed to bend and warp, pulsating with the force of their power. Thomas took a step back, his heart hammering in his chest. He could feel their eyes on him, though their forms were ever-changing. He had no idea what they wanted, but it was clear that they didn't belong here. He had been warned, but he hadn't fully understood the gravity of the situation until now. "You have released us," a voice echoed, reverberating inside his skull. The sound was like 1,000 whispers overlapping, blending into one eerie voice. "You have opened the door to our world." Thomas's body froze as the voice spoke directly into his mind, echoing with the weight of 1,000 untold truths. He stumbled backward, clutching the wall for support. The truth was now unmistakable. He had made a fatal mistake. He had allowed the entities to escape, and now there was no stopping them. They weren't just invaders from another dimension. They were ancient beings, forces of nature far beyond human comprehension. They were not bound by the laws of physics. They could bend reality to their will, and now that they had crossed over, they would continue to do so. "Why?" Thomas gasped, his voice shaking. "Why us? Why now?" The entity's form flickered in front of him, and in an instant he saw their true shape. A swirling vortex of energy, an amalgamation of light and darkness that existed outside of time. Their power was infinite, and they had come to claim what was theirs. "You are nothing," the voice answered. "You have opened the door. Now you will see what lies beyond it." The entity's presence seemed to expand, filling every corner of the room. The walls shook, and the air itself seemed to twist as the force grew stronger. The temperature continued to drop, and the room became unbearably cold. Thomas could feel his body growing numb as he struggled to hold on to consciousness. He knew, in that moment, that there was no escape. The forces he had unleashed were beyond anything human technology or understanding could comprehend. The only thing left to do was to watch as the world he knew collapsed into chaos. Thomas collapsed to his knees, unable to escape the overwhelming presence of the entities surrounding him. The room was a blur of light and shadow as the force continued to intensify. His mind felt like it was unraveling, and he knew that if he didn't act soon, it would be too late. The portal continued to pulse in front of him, its energy growing stronger with each passing second. He could feel the pull of the other dimension, the irresistible force drawing him toward it. There was no more time. He had to make a choice. Was there any way to stop them? Was there a way to seal the portal, to undo the damage he had done? He reached for the control panel, his fingers trembling. As he touched the buttons, the screen flickered back to life. He saw the control systems flash before his eyes, and for the first time, he understood. This wasn't just a machine. It was a key that could either lock the portal or open it fully. But in his heart, he knew the truth. The entities had already won. As Thomas stared at the control panel, a single thought consumed him. There was no way to close it now. The portal had already expanded beyond what anyone had ever anticipated. What he had once believed was merely an experiment had become a reality beyond human comprehension. The entities from another world were no longer bound by the physical limitations of the space station. They had crossed over, and now the consequences were becoming clear. The hum in the room had intensified, growing louder, as if the very air around him had thickened. The temperature had dropped to a point where his breath crystallized in the air. Each exhale came out in jagged bursts, his body struggling to cope with the cold that seeped into his bones. He knew the portal was opening wider now. There was no stopping it. A chill ran down his spine, not from the cold, but from the knowledge that he had opened a door to something far darker than he could understand. The mission was supposed to be a breakthrough, a discovery that would expand human knowledge. But instead, he had unleashed something that couldn't be controlled. A voice, low and distorted, echoed through the air, and for a moment, Thomas could have sworn he heard it coming from all around him. The walls of the room seemed to pulse, a living, breathing entity in itself. "You cannot stop us now," the voice whispered. "You have given us access to your world. There is no going back." Thomas gripped the control panel, his knuckles white from the pressure. The buttons before him flickered. The entity was toying with him, letting him believe there was still a chance to turn things around. His mind raced. Could he stop it? Was there a way to reverse the damage? His eyes scanned the data on the screens in front of him, searching for any glimmer of hope. But everything pointed to one undeniable truth. The portal had grown too powerful. No human could possibly contain it now. There was a single moment of clarity. He knew the only option left was to sever the connection. But what would happen then? Would the entities simply wait for another opportunity? Or would they destroy everything they had built? Would Earth itself be in danger? His hands were shaking as he reached for the emergency shutdown sequence. The portal shimmered, becoming even more vibrant, like an angry storm in the distance, pulling him in. The entities were aware of his decision. They knew what he was planning. The screen in front of him shifted once again. This time, the symbols were no longer just alien patterns. They began to form words, words that sent a wave of terror crashing through him. "We are already inside." In that instant, Thomas knew it was too late. The portal had already embedded itself within the station's core systems. It wasn't just a doorway anymore. It was a part of the station. And more chillingly, it was part of him. The dark hum of the entity's presence grew louder, enveloping him, until the world around him seemed to distort. Thomas had just become the final link in their chain. They were no longer outside. They were inside, using him as a conduit. As the portal continued to pulse and twist before his eyes, something strange began to happen. Time seemed to slow, and for the first time, Thomas began to see the truth of what he had done. His mind was flooded with images, alien landscapes, terrifying creatures, and ancient cryptic symbols that felt like they had been burned into his very soul. The more he tried to disconnect the systems, the more the screens seemed to resist, showing him images of vast, uncharted realms far beyond anything he had ever imagined. The creatures were no longer just shadows. They were alive, existing in an infinite space beyond space and time. As the images grew clearer, Thomas realized with horror that the entities he had unleashed weren't just aliens. They were something older, something cosmic in nature, transcending human understanding. They weren't from another planet. They were from another dimension, a space where time and reality had no meaning. And now, they were here, in his world, in his station. "No," Thomas whispered, his voice trembling with fear. His hand hovered over the emergency shutdown button, but his body felt paralyzed, caught in the gravity of what he had uncovered. The symbols on the screen shifted again, and this time they formed a phrase that sent a cold wave through him. "You will never be free." The air around him seemed to grow heavier, charged with an energy that made his skin prickle. The walls of the station, once solid and unyielding, now felt like a flimsy membrane between him and the infinite horrors he had unleashed. His heart raced, and his breaths came in shallow gasps. He had made a mistake that had doomed everything. The portal was no longer something he could control. It had grown into something far more dangerous. And now it was too late to turn back. Thomas stumbled back from the console, his eyes wide with disbelief as the screen before him continued to flash with the alien symbols. The room seemed to tilt, the walls shifting in a way that defied all logical explanation. The floor beneath him felt as though it was vibrating with a deep, sinister pulse. He wasn't sure if it was the station or his mind that was unraveling, but the distinction no longer seemed important. The entity, whatever it was, had taken control. It wasn't just manipulating the data anymore. It was in the station, in the air around him, in his thoughts. He could feel its presence deep inside him, like an invasive force, pushing through his own consciousness, clawing at the edges of his mind. He tried to take a step, but his body felt heavy, weighed down by an invisible force. The portal shimmered before him, expanding and contracting like a living, breathing organism. It was feeding off the station's energy, using it as a conduit to remain anchored in their reality. And with every passing second, it grew stronger, more real, more present. "I should have stopped it sooner," Thomas muttered, his voice barely audible as he struggled to break free of the entity's influence. He reached out, his hand trembling, trying to reach the emergency override switch. But before his fingers could make contact, A flash of blinding light erupted from the screen. It wasn't a simple flash of light. It was a shock wave that reverberated through the station, sending a wave of panic through Thomas's chest. His heartbeat surged, his mind racing. Something was coming through the portal, something that wasn't human. The light grew brighter, and Thomas could hear a low, almost inaudible hum, something that felt alive, like the very air around him was resonating with the entity's presence. He couldn't escape it. He was trapped. The symbols on the screen continued to shift and twist, forming images of dark, vast landscapes and strange, shifting creatures. Beings that looked nothing like the aliens he had expected. These weren't beings made of flesh. They were made of pure energy, intangible, shifting, flowing like liquid light. They were ancient, older than anything Thomas could comprehend. And now, they were coming through. As the images shifted on the screen, Thomas could see that the creatures were staring at him, their glowing eyes piercing through the screen, as if they were aware of his presence. They weren't just passive observers. They were waiting for him to make his next move. "What do you want from me?" Thomas whispered, his voice hoarse. He didn't expect an answer, but the symbols on the screen shifted again, this time more violently. The creature's eyes glowed brighter, and a deep, resonating hum filled the room, shaking the walls and the floor beneath him. The hum grew louder, more intense, until Thomas thought he might lose his mind. And then the screen flashed one final time, and everything stopped. For a moment, the station was silent. The hum had ceased. The energy in the room had dissipated. The light from the portal had dimmed. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Thomas felt nothing. The room was eerily quiet, but then he heard it. A voice, not one that came from the screen, but one that came from inside his own head. "You are ours now." The words sent a chill through his spine, colder than the temperature of deep space. The entity had claimed him, and now it would not let go. Thomas felt the weight of the entity's words echoing in his skull. "You are ours now." The voice, low and resonant, reverberated deep within his mind, as if the very fabric of his consciousness had been intertwined with the force that was controlling the station. His limbs were frozen, unable to move, his body a mere vessel for the alien presence that had invaded his being. The walls of the space station, once a symbol of human achievement and curiosity, now felt like a prison, a vast, metallic tomb where he was no longer in control. The lights flickered, casting erratic shadows on the walls, and the air around him grew thick and oppressive. It was as though the station itself had become alive, pulsing in sync with the entity that had breached its systems. The console in front of him glowed with an eerie green hue, the symbols still shifting across the screen, now blending with images of unfamiliar galaxies, alien structures, and entities that were too complex to comprehend. He tried to look away, but the images seemed to demand his attention. He couldn't tear his eyes from them. His thoughts were fragmented, torn between the reality of the station and the alien world he was being shown. What was this place? Where were these images coming from? Were they visions of another universe? Were they memories of something older, more ancient than humanity itself? The voice inside his head returned, but this time it was more direct. You will know soon enough. It wasn't just words. It was an understanding, a flood of knowledge, too vast to comprehend, was being forced into his mind. The information was like an overwhelming tide, drowning him in visions of unknown worlds, ancient civilizations, and terrifying creatures. He saw beings made of pure energy, their bodies shifting like liquid light. He saw planets torn apart by invisible forces, entire star systems collapsing into black holes. The more he tried to resist, the stronger the pull became. It was as though the entity was feeding off his fear, amplifying it, making him feel the weight of an unimaginable truth, one that he was powerless to stop. Suddenly, the station's systems flickered. A loud bang echoed through the halls, followed by the sound of alarms blaring. The monitors displayed a countdown. The door to the station's core had been breached. He could feel the coldness in his bones, the sensation of being watched, followed by an unsettling realization. Something, or someone, was coming for him. But there was no way to escape. The walls seemed to stretch, elongating into an endless void. The bright lights of the station flickered and distorted, like the very laws of physics were being rewritten around him. His heart raced as he realized the horrifying truth. He was no longer just trapped on a space station. He was trapped within the very heart of the entity, a force that had transcended space and time, far beyond his understanding. A sudden pull in the air, a sensation of weightlessness, brought him back to his senses, and before he could process what was happening, he found himself standing at the entrance to the core of the station. The very walls seemed to be alive, pulsating with a dark energy that was pulling him in. He heard footsteps approaching from behind, echoing in the emptiness of the station. But as he turned to face the source, no one was there. The station and the entity had claimed everything, even his own mind. A chilling laugh reverberated inside his skull. You will be the last to understand. The rest of your team is already mine. And then the light around him flickered, and the walls of the station began to close in. His last thought before everything went dark was simple. This is just the beginning. Thomas awoke to silence. The familiar hum of the station's systems was gone. The alarms had stopped blaring. There were no more flashing lights, no more flashing green symbols or voices in his mind. For a moment, he thought he had been spared, that perhaps the terror he'd experienced was just a bad dream. But when he opened his eyes, the world around him shattered his hopes. The space station was no longer the place he remembered. The walls were slick with what looked like a viscous dark liquid, and the corridors had become twisted and warped, stretching into an endless black void. It felt as though he was standing in the heart of something alive, something that pulsed with a terrifying alien energy. Every step he took seemed to echo into eternity, but no sound ever came back. "Where is everyone?" His voice trembled in the stillness. His team had disappeared. He had heard their screams before, their final words echoing in his mind. But now, there was nothing. He staggered forward, his head swimming with confusion and dread. The station, or whatever it had become, didn't just look different. It felt different. The air was heavier, the temperature colder. There was no longer any sense of gravity. He floated not by choice, but by the unnerving feeling that the very laws of physics had stopped applying here. He reached out to grab the railings, but his fingers passed through them, as though the station had turned to liquid in places. His stomach turned, nausea flooding through him. Before he could process the horror of this situation, a deep, resonating voice rang through his mind again. "You are the last one." He froze, panic rising in his chest. The voice wasn't the same as before, but he could feel its presence, as if the very air around him was alive, waiting to consume him. The walls pulsed with a rhythmic, almost hypnotic energy. The air seemed to vibrate, making his bones ache. And then a shape emerged from the darkness. A figure, or rather, a mass of shifting energy and form, appeared before him. It wasn't fully visible, like a ghost made of shadows. It flickered in and out of existence. Its shape seemed to change constantly, but there was no denying the intensity of its presence. It was the source of the voice. "You have breached the barrier," the entity said, its tone cold, devoid of any emotion. "You should have never come here. You cannot undo what has been done." He took a step back, fear gripping his heart. "What are you? What is this place?" The figure's form twisted again, the darkness surrounding it growing thicker. "I am beyond your comprehension. I am the thing that has waited for you to awaken. The gate has been opened, and now it's too late." The words sent a chill running through Thomas. He tried to move, to escape, but his feet wouldn't move. He was paralyzed, locked in place as the figure drew closer. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. He had awoken something that was never meant to be disturbed, and now it was claiming its prize. "I tried to stop it," he whispered to himself, the weight of his failure crashing down on him. "But it's too late." "Yes," the voice hissed. "It is too late. The truth is now revealed." Before he could react, the entity surged forward, the darkness swallowing him whole. The space station, once his home, had turned into an unforgiving prison, a vessel of darkness, and Thomas was its last occupant. The truth had been set in motion, and now the entity would finish what it started. And somewhere in the distance, a faint whisper echoed, "The end is only the beginning." Thomas's heart raced as the entity's presence enveloped him. He couldn't see anything. He couldn't feel the floor beneath his feet. There was only the sensation of being pulled into the depths of a void where time and space no longer mattered. His body felt weightless, floating in a boundless blackness that seemed to stretch out forever. Panic gripped his chest. The air was thick, almost suffocating. He gasped, trying to draw in a breath. But it was as if the very atmosphere was an illusion, something he could never truly touch. He tried to move, but his limbs were frozen, held in place by an unseen force. His mind screamed, but his mouth remained silent, his cries echoing only in his thoughts. And then, a voice, a soft whisper, broke through the silence. It wasn't the same voice he'd heard before, nor was it human. It felt ancient, a voice older than time itself. "You are not alone," it said. The words hit him like a wave of cold dread. He wanted to scream, to run, but no words escaped his lips. The voice wasn't just speaking to him, it was speaking through him. For the first time, the vast, terrifying dark around him began to feel less like an emptiness and more like something alive, a presence that filled every corner of his mind. The darkness seemed to pulse, as though it was watching him, waiting for him to understand its true nature. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a blinding light. It wasn't the soft, comforting kind of light one might expect. No, this was harsh, unforgiving light that cut through the darkness like a blade. His eyes stung, and he squinted against the overwhelming brightness. As the light faded, he found himself standing on the station once again, except it was different now. The once familiar walls had twisted, transformed into something grotesque, alive with shapes and symbols that shifted, moving like writhing creatures on the walls. There were eyes, dozens of them, etched into the walls, watching him, following his every move. He felt the presence of the entity again, this time far stronger than before. It was everywhere, surrounding him, suffocating him. A voice echoed in his mind, clear as day. "You will never leave here. This is your home now, and this is where you will understand. You opened the door, and now you must walk through it." Thomas tried to scream, but his voice didn't come out. He looked down at his hands, expecting to see the familiar human form he'd always known. Instead, his hands were distorted, pulsing with a strange energy. His skin seemed to ripple with each breath, as though his very being was becoming part of the station itself. His heart raced, and a deep sense of dread settled in his gut. The realization hit him with terrifying clarity. The entity had been waiting for him to open the door, to unlock its prison. But it wasn't just the station that was changing. He was changing too. "You belong to us now," the voice whispered, louder than ever, its tone now filled with something akin to satisfaction. The walls began to shift and distort. The station was no longer the place he knew. It was alive, evolving, and consuming him. He could feel the walls pressing in on him, feel the dark energy coursing through his veins, merging with his very soul. Then, the most terrifying thought crossed his mind. The station wasn't just a ship anymore. It was a living entity, and it was claiming him. His body began to ache, as if every cell was being remade, restructured to fit the station's new purpose. His eyes fluttered, and his vision blurred as the transformation began. But then, just as quickly as it had begun, the sensation stopped. He was no longer on the station. In an instant, he found himself standing in a vast, empty space. But this wasn't the void of space. It was something else, something beyond his comprehension. It was a place that seemed to stretch on forever, with no beginning and no end. His heart pounded as he realized that whatever he had unlocked was far worse than anything he had imagined. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was part of something much larger than himself. And whatever was happening wasn't just a trap. It was the beginning of something far darker. The endless void stretched around Thomas, suffocating him with its oppressive silence. He could feel the weight of his thoughts, each one heavier than the last, as if the space itself was pressing down on his mind. His breathing quickened, the panic threatening to consume him. But he couldn't look away from the void. There was something in it, something he needed to understand. A soft hum filled the air, vibrating beneath his feet, then rising to a deafening crescendo. His ears rang, but the sound wasn't something external. It was inside him, inside his mind. The walls of the space seemed to pulse with the rhythm, a deep, resonating sound that made his body tingle with a strange energy. It was an object, massive and looming, yet it seemed to shimmer in and out of existence, as if it was not fully anchored in this reality. It was a structure, one unlike anything he had ever seen. At first glance, it appeared to be an enormous monolith, carved with alien symbols, glowing faintly with an unearthly light. But as he stared at it, the structure seemed to shift, twisting, changing, becoming something else entirely. It was alive. The monolith wasn't just a building. It was a part of the entity that had claimed the station. The symbols on its surface shifted and moved, rearranging themselves like a language that was constantly evolving. It was as if the very fabric of space was breathing around the object, and Thomas felt an overwhelming sense of connection, as if he had always been destined to be here. In this moment, the hum grew louder, vibrating through his entire being. And then a voice broke through the sound, its tone both cold and ancient. "You have opened the door. You have set the path." Thomas's chest tightened. The voice wasn't human. It wasn't even a language he could understand. Yet somehow, the words were clear, filling his mind with a deep, unsettling truth. This was not a place of salvation. It was a place of evolution, and Thomas was now a part of it. "You belong to us now." The voice spoke again, its words sending a ripple through the air, as if the very space around him was bending and warping under the weight of the words. His heart pounded in his chest as he realized the terrifying truth. He had unlocked something that had been waiting for eons, something that was now aware of him, and it had already begun its transformation of him. The monolith continued to shift and pulse, its surface crackling with energy. It began to expand, growing larger and larger until it filled his entire field of vision. And as it grew, the space around him began to distort, The rules of reality were no longer relevant. You are becoming one with us. Thomas reached out a trembling hand, unable to resist the pull. His fingers brushed against the surface of the monolith, and the instant he touched it, a flood of images and sensations crashed into him. Memories that weren't his own, voices speaking languages he didn't understand, visions of other worlds, other universes. Everything collided in his mind, drowning him in the sheer enormity of it all. His body felt as though it was being pulled apart, torn between his human form and the entity he had awakened. He wanted to scream, but the sound was trapped inside him, lost in the whirl of visions and sensations. Then, everything went black. When Thomas awoke, he was no longer sure of where or when he was. The blackness that had overtaken him seemed to linger, his surroundings a blur of shifting shadows and lights. He tried to move, but his limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. It was as if his body was caught in a strange in-between state, a place where time and space had no meaning. But then, a voice echoed in his mind, sharp and clear. You have been chosen. The words didn't come from any physical source. They seemed to reverberate within the depths of his own mind, resonating with an energy that he couldn't comprehend. His head throbbed as the weight of the voice settled over him. There was a terrible clarity to it. This wasn't just a random event. This had been inevitable. The transformation is already complete. You are no longer just human. Thomas wanted to scream, to protest, but the voice continued, flooding his mind with knowledge, with truths he wasn't ready to understand. You opened the door, you set the path, and now you must choose. He could feel the presence all around him now, an overwhelming sense of consciousness, of awareness. It wasn't just inside his mind. It was everything, everywhere. The entity, the one that had taken control of the station, the one that had bent the laws of reality, was now a part of him. The weight of the choice pressed down on Thomas, a crushing burden. He had always thought of himself as a man of reason, a man grounded in science, but the reality he now faced was anything but rational. It was as if the boundaries of everything he had ever known were being erased, rewritten in real time. You can stay and join us, become part of the entity, evolve with us across worlds and realities beyond time. The words made his blood run cold. He had been given a choice, one that no human had ever faced, to join this entity, to leave behind his humanity and become part of something vast, something beyond comprehension, or to fight against it. But could he even fight? How could he resist something that had already rewritten his very existence? Or you can leave, the voice said, almost with a hint of amusement. But know this, there is no escape. You cannot return to the life you once knew. Thomas felt a surge of panic rise within him. The thought of giving up everything, of becoming something else entirely, was terrifying. But the thought of what would happen if he left, what would happen to him, what would happen to the station, to humanity, to the universe? He closed his eyes, his mind racing as the weight of the decision settled deep within him. He could feel the presence of the entity, pressing against him, waiting for his choice. It was inevitable, it seemed to whisper. For a moment, he felt like he was floating in an ocean of thought, lost, drowning in the enormity of it all. And then, a single thought broke through the chaos. What happens if I refuse? There was silence, a stillness that stretched through his entire being. The voice didn't respond immediately. It seemed to consider the question, weighing the consequences of such an act. And then the answer came. You will be forgotten. The weight of that final statement fell on Thomas like a ton of bricks. He was at the crossroads of something ancient, something terrifying. The choice was his to make, but the price was unimaginable. What would he choose? Would he join the entity? Or would he refuse, knowing that he might be erased forever, lost in the depths of